The cold steel pressed against Sarah McKenna's spine felt nothing like the Montana wind. For 3 years, that wind had been her only real companion. Her hands froze on the fence post she'd been mending. Splinters dug into her palms, but she didn't feel them. All she felt was the hard, round mouth of a gun barrel shoved between her shoulder blades. Her breath caught, a tiny trapped thing in her throat. "Don't move," a gravelly voice growled behind her. And for the first time since she'd buried her husband, Sarah felt something other than the deep, dull numbness of survival. It was fear. Raw, electric fear that shot through her veins and screamed a single, forgotten truth. She still wanted to live. Sarah had learned to be still. 3 years of solitude on the edge of the world had taught her that. Movement without purpose was a waste of energy. And out here, energy was the thin, frayed line between seeing another sunrise and becoming another forgotten grave on the prairie. At 28, she'd already buried a husband. She'd buried a child lost to fever. She'd walked away from a life in the East that expected her to crumble into a neat, respectable pile of grief. Instead, she'd come here. She'd taken Marcus McKenna's failing homestead and fought it into something that sustained her. Barely, but enough. The gun barrel didn't waver, but the voice behind it lost its edge. It cracked. "Ma'am," the man said, his voice strained, "I need you to turn around, real slow. My daughter, she's been snake bit, and your place is the only one for 15 miles. Snake bit. 2 words, and they changed everything. Sarah turned, her movements careful, measured. She took in the man standing before her. He was tall, coated in a thick layer of dust, with storm-gray eyes that held a desperate, jagged fear she knew all too well. In his arms, he cradled a little girl, maybe 10 years old. Her face was pale and slick with sweat, her leg already purple and swollen beneath a torn calico dress. A rattler. Sarah knew it without asking. "How long?" she asked, her voice raspy from disuse. She was already moving toward the cabin, her mind a flurry of calculations. 20 minutes, he gasped, following her. The gun was back in its holster, but his whole body was a wire pulled taut. Maybe 30. The horse threw her near a den. It got her calf. Sarah's mind was already a checklist. Whiskey, for the wound and the pain, her sharpest knife. The poultice recipe an old Crow woman had taught her years ago, a trade for a winter's worth of dried goods. "Bring her inside," Sarah commanded, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Put her on the table." The cabin was sparse, but spotless. Everything had its place. Out here, disorder was just another word for death. Sarah lit the lamp with steady hands as the man laid his daughter down. He moved with a gentleness that was heartbreaking, a practiced care that spoke of 1,000 bedtimes, 1,000 scraped knees. The girl whimpered, her eyes fluttering. She was barely conscious. "What's her name?" Sarah asked. She was already slicing away the fabric around the wound with a small, sharp blade. "Lily," he said, his voice thick. "Lily Brennan, I'm Cole. Sarah McKenna. Hold her shoulders. Don't let her move." She didn't wait for him to agree. She just went to work, her hands moving with the focused efficiency of someone who had doctored livestock and neighbors for years. The bite was bad. 2 deep fang marks, the tissue around them angry and hot to the touch. But it wasn't a death sentence. Not if she was fast enough. Cole Brennan watched her. He watched her hands, her face, his gaze so intense it made the hairs on Sarah's arms stand up. She was used to being alone. She was used to the vast, crushing silence of the prairie. Having this stranger in her tiny cabin, his daughter's life resting entirely in her calloused hands, it created a pressure she hadn't felt in years. It was a terrifying, unwelcome feeling. It felt like being needed. An hour passed. Then 2. The poultice was on, drawing the poison. The fever was setting in. "She'll live," Sarah said finally, her voice flat. She was washing her hands in a basin of water, the liquid stained dark with herbs and fear. But she needs to stay still, at least 2 days. The poison has to work its way through. Cole's exhale was a ragged, shaky thing. We'll camp outside. I won't impose. Sarah turned, fixing him with a stare that could freeze running water. Don't be a fool. You'll sleep in here, where I can watch her fever. Her tone was a brick wall. There's a spare room, she added, her voice softening just a fraction. Was going to be a nursery once. The words hung in the small cabin, heavy with a history she refused to explain. Cole just nodded, a flicker of pained understanding in his storm-gray eyes. As darkness fell over the endless prairie, Sarah learned the shape of Cole Brennan's silence. He wasn't a talker, but he was a watcher. He noticed the worn state of her dress, the calluses on her palms, the way she'd chopped her hair short last summer, because long hair was a luxury she couldn't afford time for. His watching made her feel seen. She wasn't sure if she liked it. Near midnight, as Sarah changed the poultice, Lily's fever spiked. The girl began to mutter, her small body trembling. "It's the dark man," she whispered, her eyes wide with feverish terror. "He's coming for the box, Pa. The dark man from Boston." Sarah froze, her hands hovering over the girl's swollen leg. Cole rushed to the table, his face a mask of alarm. He put a hand on Lily's forehead, murmuring soft words. "It's just the fever, Lily Bug. Just a bad dream." But Sarah saw the look in his eyes. It wasn't just a dream. He knew exactly who Lily was talking about, and he was terrified. "What box?" Sarah asked, her voice low and steady as she finished her work. "Who is the dark man from Boston?" Cole wouldn't meet her eyes. He just kept stroking his daughter's hair, his jaw tight. Fever dreams means nothing. But Sarah knew a lie when she heard one. She'd lived alone for 3 years, but she hadn't forgotten the way a man looked when he was hiding something dangerous. This stranger, this Cole Brennan, hadn't just brought a snake-bitten child to her door. He'd brought trouble. The kind of trouble that didn't just ride away when the sun came up. The kind that got people killed. By morning, Lily's fever had broken. She woke up weak but clear-eyed, asking for water in the small, plaintive voice of a child who had been truly terrified and come out the other side. Sarah brought her broth, helped her sit up. The girl's small hand gripped hers with a surprising, desperate strength. "Thank you," Lily whispered, her eyes huge in her pale face. "Pa said you saved me." "Your pa got you here fast enough," Sarah replied, her voice softer than she intended. "That's what saved you." She didn't pull her hand away. The warmth of that small grip felt like a lit match held to the ice she'd carefully packed around her heart. It was a dangerous feeling. Cole insisted on staying to help with repairs as payment. It was the frontier way. Sarah protested, a reflexive habit born of 3 years of fierce self-reliance. But he was already walking her fence line, his expert eye noting the lean in her barn roof, the way her well-needed reinforcing. For 3 days, he worked. He moved with a tireless, powerful grace, his hands as skilled with a hammer as they had been gentle with his daughter. And Sarah found herself watching him. She found herself cooking for 3 instead of 1. She found herself listening for the sound of his footsteps, the low rumble of his voice as he spoke to Lily. She found herself brushing her hair before he came in for supper. It was foolish, it was dangerous, and she couldn't stop. On the 4th day, he stood beside her, surveying her small, neat vegetable garden and the chickens scratching in the dust. The sun was low, painting the vast sky in shades of orange and bruised purple. "You've done good here," Cole said, his voice quiet. "Most people couldn't make this land produce a thing." "Most people have help," Sarah said, wiping her hands on her apron. She was acutely aware of him standing so close, of the heat radiating from his body. "That's not it," he said, his voice certain. "You're skilled, determined. Half the ranchers I know, myself included, don't keep their operations running as clean as you keep this place." The compliment landed like a physical touch. Sarah turned away, her cheeks burning. "Your daughter is well enough to travel now." It was a dismissal, a wall going up. "I know." But he didn't move. He took a step closer. "Sarah," he started, then stopped. He ran a hand through his dusty hair. "I'm not good at this. Haven't thought about anything but Lily and the ranch for 4 years. But I can't stop thinking that you shouldn't be alone out here. It's not safe." "I manage," she said, her voice tight. "I know you do. Lord, I know. That's not what I mean." He stepped closer again, and this time Sarah held her ground, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I mean, you shouldn't have to manage alone. Not because you can't, but because no one should have to." The air grew thick, heavy with things unsaid. "What are you saying, Cole?" "I'm saying I have a ranch, 10 miles east of here, good water, decent grazing, a house that's too big and too quiet, a daughter who needs a woman to teach her things I can't." He paused, his jaw working. "I wasn't looking for this, any of this. But then Lily got bit, and you saved her. And I watched you work, and I watched you with her, and I realized I'd forgotten what it felt like to want something. Something other than just surviving another season." Sarah's throat felt like it was closing up. "You don't know me." "I know enough," he said, his voice a low growl. "I know you're strong and capable and kinder than you let on. I know you've been alone so long you've convinced yourself it's what you want. But I see the way you look at my little girl. And I see the way this place is breaking you down, piece by piece, because one person can't hold back the wilderness forever." Bitterness rose in her throat, sharp and familiar. "And you're offering to rescue me?" "No." His hand came up, cupping her cheek. His skin was rough and warm, and the unexpected touch sent a jolt straight through her. "I'm offering a partnership. Someone to stand with, not behind. I'm offering you a reason to stop just surviving and start living again." Her eyes burned. "I don't know if I can. After my husband, after my baby. I built these walls for a reason." "I know," he whispered, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "I built the same ones." The kiss that followed was inevitable and terrifying and sweeter than anything she had ever known. It tasted of dust and desperation and a fragile, terrifying hope. Sarah let herself lean into it, just for a second. Let herself feel the solid warmth of another human being who understood loss, who understood loneliness. When they broke apart, she was shaking. "I'm scared," she admitted, the words torn from her. "Good," he said, resting his forehead against hers. "Me too. But I'm starting to think fear just means it matters." Before she could answer, Lily called from the cabin. The moment shattered, but something had shifted, something permanent. The cabin, once her fortress, suddenly felt like a cage. That night, she sat on her porch, staring at the indifferent stars. She thought about Marcus. She thought about the baby she never got to hold. And she thought about Cole Brennan, the man who had crashed into her life with a dying child in his arms, the man whose grief mirrored her own, whose kiss had felt like a key turning in a lock she'd long forgotten. And she made a decision. The consequences of that decision didn't wait long. They arrived 3 days later in a cloud of dust from the north. Cole had returned to his ranch to settle his affairs, promising to be back by the end of the week to help her move. Sarah had spent the days in a daze, packing the few belongings she owned, saying a silent goodbye to the land she had fought and bled for. She was loading a crate of preserves into the wagon Cole had left her when she saw them. 4 riders, moving fast. Her hand went to the rifle she now kept propped by the door, a legacy of Cole's insistence. These men weren't ranchers. Their clothes were too fine, their horses too sleek, their eyes too cold and calculating. The leader, a man of about 40 with the polished menace of a city predator, reined in his horse. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. McKenna?" he asked, though it wasn't a question. "I'm Robert Fairchild. I believe you knew my brother, Marcus." Sarah's blood ran cold. Marcus's family, the wealthy Boston relations who had disowned him for heading west, who had never even acknowledged her existence. "What do you want?" she asked, her hand tightening on the rifle stock. "This land," Fairchild said simply. "It belonged to my brother. Upon his death, it reverts to the Fairchild family estate." He produced a sheaf of papers from his coat. "I have the deed, the legal documentation. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises." "That's not possible," Sarah stammered. "Marcus left this to me." "Did he? We were married." Fairchild's smile widened. "In a ceremony performed by a circuit preacher with no legal standing." "I've checked the territorial records, Mrs. McKenna. There's no official marriage certificate." He consulted his papers with a theatrical flourish. "Which means you are, legally speaking, Miss Sarah Winters." The ground tilted beneath her feet. She had never questioned it. Marcus had been sick, desperate to know she'd be safe. He'd handled everything. She had trusted him. "I have homestead rights," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "You've worked this land for 3 years under a name that isn't legally yours," Fairchild countered smoothly. "Which, my lawyers assure me, invalidates the claim. You're trespassing, Miss Winters, and I'm being exceptionally generous, giving you a day." Her mind reeled. Everything she had built, every brutal winter survived, every fence post hammered into the frozen ground, all of it built on a lie, on nothing. "Why?" she whispered. "Why now? Marcus has been dead for 3 years." Fairchild's cold eyes gleamed with greed. "Because now, this land is valuable. The railroad is coming through. And your pathetic little homestead happens to sit on the most direct route. They're paying handsomely for the right parcels." He gestured to his men, who now sat watching her, their hands resting on their pistols. "We'll be back tomorrow at noon," Fairchild said. "I suggest you be gone." They wheeled their horses and rode away, leaving Sarah standing in the wreckage of her life. She sank onto the porch steps, the heavy rifle across her knees, and for the first time in 3 long, silent years, she wept. Not quiet tears of grief, but the harsh, gut-wrenching sobs of a woman who had finally broken. That's how Cole found her an hour later. He arrived early, his wagon loaded with supplies, his face alight with the eager hope of a man starting over. That hope died the second he saw her. He was off his horse before it stopped, crossing the yard in 3 long strides. "Sarah, what is it? What happened?" She told him everything, her words catching on sobs. She showed him the papers Fairchild had left. She watched his face darken, watched his hands clench into fists. When she finished, he pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. His heartbeat was a steady, solid drum against her ear. "We'll fight this," he said, his voice a low growl. "I know lawyers in Helena. The territorial judge owes me a favor." "There's no time!" she cried, pulling back. "He wants me gone by noon tomorrow. He has the law on his side, Cole." She wiped at her face with a rough hand. "I can't ask you to get involved in this. You have Lily, your ranch." "Stop," he commanded, his hands gripping her shoulders. "Just stop. You think I'm going to ride away now because things got hard? You think I'm that kind of man? I think you're a good man who shouldn't risk everything for a woman he's known for less than a week." "Then you're wrong," he said, his jaw set like granite. "You're wrong about how long it takes to know what matters." He stared at her, his storm-gray eyes burning with an insane, brilliant light. "Marry me," he said. Sarah stared at him, speechless. "Not tomorrow. Not next week. Right now." He pressed on, his words coming fast and urgent. "We ride to town. We find the circuit judge, and we make it legal. Recorded. Unquestionable. Then this land becomes marital property. Fairchild will have to fight both of us in territorial court, and that will take months. Months, Sarah. Long enough for us to prove your claim." That's insane," she breathed. "It's practical," he countered, his voice softening. "And it's what I wanted anyway, just on a faster timeline." He took her face in his hands. "Sarah, listen to me. This isn't a rescue. I'm offering this because in the past week you've reminded me what it's like to have a partner. Someone who makes me want to build something better, not just maintain what I've got. You are worth fighting for." "What if we lose?" she whispered, the fear a cold knot in her stomach. "What if Fairchild takes this anyway, and you've tied yourself to a woman with nothing?" "Then we lose this piece of land," he said without hesitation. "But we don't lose each other, and we don't lose what we can build together. I have a ranch. I have resources. You have skill and strength and a stubbornness that could stop a charging bull." A small smile touched his lips. "Together, we have more than enough, but I will be damned if I let some slick Boston bastard take what's yours without one hell of a fight." He was insane. This was insane. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw certainty. She saw promise. She saw something that, if she was brave enough to believe it, might just be love. And for the second time in a week, Sarah McKenna made a decision that would change her life forever. "Okay," she whispered, a watery smile breaking through her tears. "Let's go get married." The ride to town was a frantic blur of pounding hooves and choking dust. Cole held her hand most of the way, his grip a warm, solid anchor in the chaos of her thoughts. They found Judge Morrison in his office above the general store, a grizzled old man who'd seen enough frontier desperation to barely raise an eyebrow at their story. "Fairchild," he grunted, stroking his beard. "Heard he was in the territory. His family's got long tentacles and deep pockets. You do this, son. You're picking a fight with a giant." "The giant is trying to steal my wife's home," Cole said, his voice level. "I'm not asking for your help in the fight, just for the weapon to start it." The judge stared at them for a long moment, his eyes sharp and assessing. He looked at Sarah, at the tear tracks on her dusty cheeks, and the raw determination in her eyes. He looked at Cole, standing solid and protective beside her. Finally, he nodded. "Get your witnesses." 10 minutes later, with the storekeeper and his wife looking on, Sarah McKenna became Sarah Brennan. The ceremony was short and stripped of all poetry, a legal transaction that took less time than saddling a horse. The judge's wife, a woman with kind eyes, pressed a simple gold band into Sarah's hand. "My mother's," she whispered. "A marriage made in a hurry ain't necessarily a marriage made in haste. Good luck to you, child." "I'll file this with the territorial office myself first thing in the morning," Judge Morrison said, signing the certificate with a flourish. "I'll backdate it by a week. If Fairchild's lawyers question it, you tell them to come see me. I'll tell them the paperwork got lost in the mail." He looked Cole dead in the eye. "Now get out of here. And for God's sake, son, mean those vows." They sent a telegram to Cole's foreman, telling him to bring 2 of the toughest ranch hands to Sarah's homestead. Trouble was coming, and they'd meet it head on. As they rode back under a sky full of stars, the flimsy marriage certificate felt as heavy as a shield in Sarah's pocket. They were no longer 2 separate people battling their own ghosts. They were a unit, for better or, more likely, for worse. When they arrived, the homestead was no longer quiet. 2 grim-faced cowboys sat on the porch, rifles across their laps. Cole's foreman, a wiry man named Jed, met them in the yard. And Lily came running out of the cabin, her face alight with a joy so pure it stole Sarah's breath. "Pa! Sarah! You did it!" she cried, looking at their joined hands, at the gold ring on Sarah's finger. "You got married?" "We did, Lilybug," Cole said, scooping her up into a hug. "Does that mean you're my ma now?" Lily asked, her voice small and hopeful, turning her wide eyes to Sarah. "Is it wrong to want that? Because of my real ma?" Sarah knelt, taking the girl's small hands in her own. "It's not wrong, sweetheart," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Love isn't a thing you can use up. You can love the people you remember and the new people in your life, all at the same time, and I would be honored to be your ma." The hug that followed was fierce and desperate and wonderful, and as she held the trembling child, Sarah felt another wall inside her crumble to dust. This was a family, her family, forged in crisis, bound by a hasty vow, and she would fight to the death to protect it. Fairchild arrived at dawn, flanked by his 4 men and a smirking, well-dressed lawyer from Helena. His smug certainty was a palpable thing. It evaporated the moment Sarah, with Cole standing beside her, produced the marriage certificate. Dated a week ago, signed and sealed by Judge Morrison. The lawyer's jaw dropped. Fairchild's face went from pale to a blotchy, furious red. "This is a trick," he snarled. "A fraud! The original claim is invalid." "Maybe it is," Cole said, stepping forward. His voice was calm, but his posture was that of a wolf about to strike. Cole's 2 ranch hands, Jed and a mountain of a man named Gus, moved to stand on either side of him. "But the marital property claim isn't. My wife's property is now our property. You want to challenge that, you'll be fighting the entire Brennan Ranch in territorial court. And I promise you, Mr. Fairchild, I have more money, more resources, and more friends in this territory than you can possibly imagine." Cole took another step forward, lowering his voice. "But I have a feeling you're not the kind of man who likes to play by the rules. I think you're the kind of man who sends thugs to scare a woman off her land." He gestured to the men behind Fairchild. "So let me make this real simple for you. You and your men ever set foot on this land again, you'll be carried off it, in pieces." The threat hung in the cold morning air, sharp and deadly. The lawyer whispered frantically in Fairchild's ear. Fairchild stared at Cole, his eyes filled with a hatred that was almost reptilian. Finally, he gave a curt, jerky nod. "This isn't over," he spat. "Oh, I know," Cole said, his smile thin and sharp. "It's just getting started. Now get off my land." They watched the men ride away, their dust trail a bitter stain against the sunrise. Sarah felt the tension drain from her body so completely she swayed on her feet. Cole caught her, his arms wrapping around her waist. She leaned against him, trusting him to hold her, trusting him to be the partner he'd promised. But as she looked out at the vast, empty prairie, a new, cold fear began to creep in. Cole had said it himself. This was just the beginning. Robert Fairchild was not a man who accepted defeat. He hadn't come all the way from Boston to be run off by a backwoods rancher and a woman he considered a squatter. They had won the first battle. But the war was coming. And Sarah had a terrible feeling it would be fought not with lawyers and papers, but with fire and blood. The move to the Brennan Ranch was a whirlwind. In a single day, Sarah's life was uprooted. The small, lonely cabin she had defended for 3 years was shuttered, its silence reclaimed by the wind. Her chickens were crated, her few possessions loaded onto the wagon. She was leaving behind a life of solitary survival for a future that was terrifyingly uncertain. Cole's ranch was a different world. It was nestled in a shallow valley, protected from the worst of the winds, with a creek that ran clear and cold. The house was large and sprawling, built of solid timber, with a wide porch and windows that caught the morning sun. It was a place built for a family, for a future. Lily was her shadow, her constant chattering guide, showing Sarah every corner of her new home with breathless excitement. This would be Sarah's room. This room, with the best light, could be her study. Here, beside the creek, they could plant a much bigger garden. The ranch hands, a dozen hardened men, were wary at first. They were loyal to Cole and fiercely protective of Lily. They watched Sarah with curious, assessing eyes. But the wariness faded quickly. It faded when they saw her gentle, expert hands with a sick calf. It faded when she rode out with them to mend a fence line, her work as quick and solid as any man's. And it vanished completely when, on the third day, a cougar was spotted stalking the herd too close to the house. Before Cole or any of the men could even grab their rifles, Sarah was moving. She snatched the rifle from the scabbard on Cole's saddle, raised it in one smooth motion, and fired. The shot was clean. Perfect. The cougar dropped, 100 yards away. A stunned silence fell over the yard. Then Gus, the mountain of a man, let out a low whistle. "Damn, boss," he said to Cole, a slow grin spreading across his face. "You didn't just get married, you hired the best damn shot in the territory." From that moment on, she wasn't just the boss's new wife. She was Sarah, one of them. But beneath the surface of this new life, the tension simmered. Cole posted guards every night. No one rode anywhere alone. The name Fairchild was a poison that had seeped into the ground, a constant, unspoken threat. One evening, a week after the move, Sarah was in the barn settling the new filly Cole had given her, a beautiful creature with a coat the color of midnight. Cole came in, his face drawn and tired. "Jed just got back from town," he said, his voice low. "He was asking around. Fairchild hasn't left the territory. He's staying at the hotel. He's been meeting with some hard men, hired guns by the sound of it." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What's he planning, Cole?" "I don't know, but he's not giving up." He leaned against the stall, running a hand over his face. "And there's something else. Jed overheard Fairchild's lawyer talking. He said Fairchild isn't just after the land for the railroad money. He said, he's looking for what Marcus buried." Sarah turned from the horse, her heart pounding. "What Marcus buried? What does that mean?" "I was hoping you could tell me," Cole said, his eyes searching hers. Did he ever talk about hiding something? Anything of value?" Sarah shook her head, her mind racing back through the years. Marcus had been a simple man, a dreamer, yes, but not a man of secrets or wealth. He'd come west to build a life, not to hide a fortune. "No," she said. "There was nothing. The homestead was all he had, all we had." But even as she said it, a memory surfaced, a faint, nagging echo. It was from the last week of Marcus's life, when the fever had him, when his words were a jumbled, broken stream. He'd gripped her hand, his eyes wild. "The firebox," he'd whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "Don't let him find the firebox, Sarah. It proves everything. Under the hearth, my promise." She had dismissed it as fever talk, delirium. But now, "The firebox," she whispered aloud. Cole straightened up, his eyes sharp. "What?" "Marcus," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Right before he died. He was rambling, I thought. He said, 'Don't let him find the firebox, under the hearth.'" They stared at each other in the dim, lantern-lit barn. The air crackled with a new, terrifying understanding. This wasn't about a railroad. This wasn't about a land claim. Marcus had hidden something at the homestead, something important enough to bring his powerful, ruthless brother all the way from Boston. Something Fairchild was willing to hire killers to find. "We have to go back," Sarah said, her voice grim. "It's too dangerous," Cole argued. "Fairchild will have men watching the place." "We'll go at night," she insisted. "We have to know what's in that box, Cole. It's the only way we'll ever be free of him." The plan was simple and desperate. They would leave after midnight, ride hard, and be back before dawn. Jed and Gus would stay behind, guarding the ranch and Lily. The ride was tense, every shadow a potential threat. They moved like ghosts through the moonless night, the only sound the soft thud of their horses' hooves on the dry earth. The homestead was dark and silent, a lonely silhouette against the starry sky. It looked smaller than she remembered, haunted. They tethered their horses in a deep ravine a quarter-mile away and approached on foot, rifles in hand. There was no sign of Fairchild's men. The place felt abandoned, eerily still. Inside the cabin, the air was cold and musty. It felt like a lifetime ago that she had lived here, that Lily had shivered with fever on the table. The hearth was made of rough fieldstone, cemented together by Marcus himself. "We'll have to break it apart," Cole whispered, grabbing a pry bar from the lean-to. The work was brutal and loud. Every scrape of the iron bar, every crack of stone, echoed in the terrifying silence. Sarah stood guard at the window, her rifle ready, her heart hammering against her ribs. Finally, Cole's pry bar hit something that wasn't stone. A dull, metallic thud. Working with his hands, he cleared away the rubble. There, nestled in a hollow space beneath the hearthstones, was a small iron firebox. It was heavy, rusted, and sealed with a simple lock. Cole smashed the lock with the pry bar. With a groan of protesting metal, the lid opened. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed cotton, were not jewels or gold, but a stack of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon and a single, small, leather-bound journal. Sarah reached in with a trembling hand and lifted out the journal. She opened it. The handwriting was Marcus's, but the first words she read made the blood drain from her face. "My dearest Sarah," the entry began. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and my brother Robert has come to claim what is not his. I am a coward for not telling you the truth while I lived, but my love for you was the only honest thing I have ever known, and I could not bear to tarnish it." Cole shone the lantern over her shoulder, his breath catching as he read along with her. The Fairchild fortune Marcus had written was not built on shipping and trade. It was built on blood. My father was not just a businessman. He was a pirate, a murderer, a slaver. He stole, he cheated, and he killed. And I, his eldest son, was his bookkeeper. The journal was a detailed ledger, page after page of dates, shipping manifests, and names. Names of men who had been swindled. Names of ships that had been scuttled for insurance money. Names of people who had been bought and sold like cattle. It was a meticulous record of every crime the Fairchild patriarch had committed to build his empire. It was proof, enough to destroy the family name, to strip them of their wealth, to send Robert Fairchild to prison for decades. "This is what he's after," Cole breathed, his voice filled with awe and terror. "This is his entire family's ruin." "My promise," Sarah whispered, remembering Marcus's last words. He had promised to expose his father one day. This journal was that promise, and he had hidden it here, in the heart of his new, honest life. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked on the porch. Both of them froze. Cole doused the lantern, plunging the cabin into absolute darkness. He moved silently to one side of the door, raising his rifle. Sarah scrambled to the window, her own weapon finding her shoulder, her eyes straining to pierce the blackness. The front door exploded inwards, splintering off its hinges. 3 figures, silhouetted against the night sky, stormed into the cabin. "He knows," a voice snarled. It was Fairchild. "He knows they're here. Find them, and find that box." Gunfire erupted. A bullet slammed into the wall inches from Sarah's head, showering her with splinters. She fired back blindly, the roar of the rifle deafening in the tiny cabin. The night exploded into a nightmare of muzzle flashes, shouting, and the terrifying chaos of a close-quarters gunfight. Cole was firing from beside the door, a steady, methodical rhythm. One of Fairchild's men screamed and went down. Sarah saw a shadow moving toward the hearth and fired again. The man grunted and stumbled back, clutching his arm. "The woman is by the window," he yelled. A bullet tore through the sleeve of Sarah's shirt, burning a hot line across her skin. She dropped to the floor, crawling desperately toward the back of the cabin, toward the small root-cellar door she had always kept hidden under a bearskin rug. "Cole!" she screamed. "The cellar!" She heard him grunt in acknowledgement as he fired 2 more shots, providing covering fire. She ripped the rug away, fumbled with the iron ring, and pulled the heavy door open. Another bullet whizzed past her ear. She scrambled down the short ladder into the cool, earthy darkness below, pulling the heavy door closed just as the sound of heavy boots thudded on the floorboards above her. She held her breath, listening. The shooting had stopped. "Where did they go?" She heard Fairchild roar from directly above her. "They vanished," one of his men said. "There's no back door." Then a new, horrifying sound, the splash of liquid, the sharp, unmistakable smell of kerosene. "If they're in here, they'll burn," Fairchild said, his voice cold and devoid of all emotion. "And if they're not, then the box and this whole rotten place will be ash. Torch it." Sarah's eyes went wide with terror. She wasn't alone in the cellar. Cole was nowhere to be seen. A match scraped. A whoosh of sound, and a sudden, hungry roar filled the world. Orange light flickered through the cracks in the cellar door. The floorboards above her were on fire. The cabin was burning, and they were going to burn her alive inside it. Heat began to press down from above, thick and suffocating. The smell of smoke filled her lungs, making her cough, her eyes stream. The roar of the fire was a living thing, a hungry beast devouring the home she had built, the place where her new life had begun. She was trapped. Cole was gone. Fairchild was outside, waiting for her to either burn to death or run out into his guns. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. This was it. This was how it ended. Buried alive, then cremated in the wreckage of her past. Then she heard a scratching sound, not from above, from the wall behind her. She scrambled back, her heart leaping into her throat. A rat? An animal trapped with her? A small section of the dirt wall crumbled inwards. Then another, a hand, covered in dirt and soot, pushed through the opening. "Sarah!" Cole's voice, a harsh, desperate whisper. He was alive. "Cole!" she choked out, scrambling toward the opening. "This way! It's an old storm drain! Goes out to the ravine!" He grunted, pulling more dirt and rock away. "Marcus must have dug it! Hurry!" The opening was just big enough to crawl through. She shoved the heavy iron box through first, then wriggled her way into the narrow, claustrophobic tunnel. It smelled of damp earth and decay. Cole was right behind her, pulling himself through just as a section of the burning ceiling collapsed into the cellar with a deafening crash. They crawled on their hands and knees, the sound of the fire fading behind them, replaced by the sound of their own ragged breathing and the frantic pounding of their hearts. The tunnel was tight, pressing in on all sides. It felt like being buried. After what seemed like an eternity, they saw a faint patch of gray ahead. The exit. They emerged into the cool night air at the bottom of the ravine, covered in dirt and sweat, gasping for breath. From here, they could see the cabin. It was no longer a structure. It was a pillar of flame, a raging inferno painting the night sky red and orange. Fairchild and his men stood watching it, their figures dark against the blaze. "Think they're still in there?" one of the men asked. "Doesn't matter," Fairchild said, his voice carrying on the still night air. "The journal is gone. That's all that matters. Let's ride. We've got one more stop to make." Sarah and Cole watched them mount their horses and ride away, not east toward the town, but west, toward the Brennan Ranch, toward Lily. A new, colder terror gripped Sarah, eclipsing the fear of the fire, the gunfight, the tunnel. "He's going after her," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He knows she's our weakness. He's going to trade her for the journal." "Then we'd better get there first," Cole said, his face a grim mask in the flickering firelight. He grabbed the iron box. "We know a shortcut." There was no time for caution. They ran to their horses and rode like the devil was chasing them, which, in a way, he was. They pushed the animals harder than they ever had before, taking a treacherous, little-known game trail that cut straight over the ridge instead of following the valley around. It was a dangerous ride in the dark, a single misstep meaning a broken leg for a horse or a broken neck for a rider. They galloped through the night, the wind tearing at them, their lungs burning, driven by a single, terrifying image. Fairchild reaching the ranch before them. Reaching Lily. As they crested the final ridge, they saw it. Torches. a small group of riders circling the main house like wolves. Fairchild had beaten them there. They reined in their horses, their chests heaving. The ranch house was dark, but they could see Jed and Gus positioned on the roof, rifles ready. The hands were defending the place. But for how long? "There's too many of them for a straight fight," Cole said, his voice strained. "And if we ride in with the journal, he'll never let Lily go." Sarah's mind was racing, her survival instincts honed by years of solitude kicking into high gear. She knew this land. She knew its secrets. And she knew how to use the wilderness as a weapon. "He wants the journal," she said, her voice low and steady. "But he also wants us dead. He thinks we're trapped. He thinks he has all the power." "He does," Cole said grimly. "No," Sarah countered, her eyes gleaming with a fierce, desperate light. "He doesn't. He's a city man. He doesn't understand this land. We're not going to ride in the front gate, Cole. We're going to use the night. We're going to use the terrain. We're going to hunt him." She slid off her horse, grabbing her rifle. She looked at Cole, her face streaked with soot, her eyes burning with a resolve that was as hard as iron. "You taught me to stop just surviving," she said. "Tonight, we teach Robert Fairchild what it means to be hunted by people with nothing left to lose." A slow, dangerous smile spread across Cole's face. He dismounted, pulling his own rifle from its scabbard. "I do love it when you talk like that, Mrs. Brennan." They left the horses and the precious journal hidden deep in a rocky crevice. Then, moving under the cover of darkness, they began to circle around, using the ravines and creek beds that Sarah had already memorized. They moved like shadows, silent and deadly. Fairchild was getting impatient. "Brennan!" he yelled, his voice echoing in the valley. "I know you're in there. I have a dozen men. Send out the woman and the girl, and I'll let the rest of you live." A rifle shot from the roof was his only answer, the bullet kicking up dust near his horse's feet. "Fine," Fairchild roared. Burn it all down." His men dismounted, carrying torches, and began to advance on the house and the barn. That's when Sarah and Cole struck. From the darkness of the creek bed, two rifles spoke as one. One of the men with a torch screamed and dropped, clutching his leg. Another fell forward into the dirt, his torch rolling away and sputtering out. Chaos erupted. Fairchild's men spun around, firing wildly into the darkness. "They're behind us!" one of them yelled. "Where?" Fairchild screamed, his horse rearing in panic. Cole fired again. Another man went down. Sarah took aim at a man trying to light an arrow to fire at the barn roof. Her shot sent him sprawling. 4 men down in less than a minute. The hired guns, men who were brave when facing unarmed homesteaders, lost their nerve. They were being picked off by ghosts. They broke ranks, scrambling for the cover of the rocks, firing blindly into the night. "Stand your ground, you cowards!" Fairchild shrieked, but it was no use. Cole and Sarah kept moving, using the darkness, firing from one position and then melting away to another. They were a 2-person army, perfectly in sync, their movements born of desperation and a deep, shared purpose. Suddenly, a figure broke from the rocks and ran, not toward his horse, but toward the back of the ranch house. It was Fairchild. He had realized his frontal assault had failed. He was going for Lily himself. "Cole, the house!" Sarah yelled. Cole took off running, a desperate, lung-bursting sprint across the open ground toward the back porch. Sarah stayed where she was, laying down covering fire, forcing the remaining gunmen to keep their heads down. She saw Cole reach the porch just as Fairchild kicked in the back door. Cole vaulted over the railing and disappeared inside. Sarah's blood ran cold. She was too far away. The fight for her family, for her daughter, was happening inside that house, and she was helpless to stop it. All she could do was keep Fairchild's men pinned down and pray. Inside, the house was dark except for the flickering firelight from the hearth. Cole saw Fairchild grab a lamp from the mantelpiece. "Lily!" Fairchild bellowed. "Come out, little girl. Your father is dead. You come with me, and I'll let you live." A small whimper came from upstairs. Fairchild smiled, a truly evil expression, and started for the stairs, the lit lamp held high. Cole launched himself out of the shadows. He hit Fairchild with the force of a freight train, sending both of them crashing to the floor. The lamp flew from Fairchild's hand, shattering against the wall. Oil splashed, and a curtain burst into flame. The two men rolled on the floor, trading brutal, desperate punches. Fairchild was wiry and fast, fighting with the viciousness of a cornered rat. Cole was stronger, fueled by a primal rage to protect his child. He slammed Fairchild's head against the floorboards, stunning him. Cole scrambled to his feet, but Fairchild was quicker. He had a knife, a thin, wicked-looking blade that seemed to appear from nowhere. He lunged, and Cole felt a searing pain in his side as the blade slid between his ribs. Cole grunted, stumbling back, clutching his side. Blood, dark in the firelight, welled between his fingers. Fairchild laughed, a ragged, breathless sound. "You see?" he gasped, advancing on Cole. "You can't win. Men like you never win against men like me. We have the money, the power. We take what we want." "Pah!" A small figure stood at the top of the stairs. It was Lily, her face pale with terror, holding an old, heavy Colt pistol in both hands. It was Cole's grandfather's gun, a relic he kept on the mantel. It was huge in her small hands, the barrel shaking. "Get away from my pa!" she screamed, her voice trembling but fierce. Fairchild laughed again. "What are you going to do, little girl? Shoot me?" He took another step toward Cole. The gun roared. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. The recoil sent Lily stumbling backward, but her aim was true. Robert Fairchild looked down at the sudden blossoming red stain on his pristine white shirt. He looked up at Lily, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Then his legs buckled, and he collapsed to the floor in a heap. The fire was spreading, licking up the walls. Cole, bleeding and weak, staggered to the foot of the stairs. "Lily Bug," he gasped. "You did it. You saved me." He scooped her into his arms and stumbled out the front door just as Sarah and the ranch hands, having routed the last of the gunmen, came running. The fire consumed the house, a funeral pyre for Robert Fairchild and the evil he had brought with him. They laid Cole on the grass. His wound was bad, but Sarah, with grim determination, knew it wasn't fatal. She tore strips from her shirt, pressing them tight against the wound, staunching the flow of blood. Lily knelt beside them, her small body shaking with shock, but her eyes were clear. She had faced the monster and won. As the sun began to rise, casting a pale, clean light over the valley, Sarah looked at what was left. Her first home was a pile of ash. Her new home was a smoldering ruin. But Cole was alive. Lily was safe. The journal was secure. They had lost almost everything, but they had won. 3 months later, they held a celebration. Not a wedding party, but a barn raising. The entire community, it seemed, had come. Ranchers and their families from 50 miles around. Judge Morrison and his wife. The shopkeeper from town. They had come with wagons full of timber, with food, with strong arms and willing hearts. They were rebuilding the Brennan Ranch house, bigger and stronger than before. The journal had been sent to a federal marshal in Helena. The Fairchild Empire, built on a foundation of lies and blood, was crumbling. The story of what had happened had spread across the territory, a modern-day legend of frontier justice. Sarah stood beside Cole, his arm around her waist, his side now healed into a puckered scar. She watched Lily laugh as she directed 2 burly cowboys on where to place a beam. The girl was no longer haunted. She was strong, resilient. She was a survivor. "You look beautiful," Cole said, his voice a low rumble against her ear. She was wearing a simple blue dress, the color of the Montana sky. Her hands were calloused from the work of rebuilding, but the gold band on her finger shone in the sun. "We built something here, Sarah," Cole said, looking out at the flurry of activity, at the community working as one. something that will outlast us. She leaned her head on his shoulder, a feeling of peace settling over her, a feeling she had once thought was lost to her forever. She had come to this territory seeking solitude, a place to hide from her grief. She had built walls around her heart to keep the world out, but the world had found her anyway. It had sent her a man with storm-gray eyes and a little girl with a snake bite. It had sent her fire and violence and fear, and through it all, she had discovered a truth she never expected. Home wasn't a place you built with timber and nails. It was a place you built with love and courage. Family wasn't something you were born into. It was something you fought for, bled for, and chose every single day. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the valley, she felt a faint, fluttering movement inside her, a secret she hadn't yet shared with Cole, a new life, a new beginning, rising from the ashes of the old. She smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. They had faced the wilderness, both outside and within. They had survived. And now, together, they were finally ready to live. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss another tale of the Untamed West. And if you've ever had to fight for something you believe in, share your story in the comments below. We read every single one. Thanks for listening.